Hello, everybody, and welcome to part two of my conversation with the one and only Thomas Jackson. In case you didn't listen to last week's episode, Thomas works directly with the Democratic Party. I mean, that's not like his main job, but that's like the cool stuff we want to talk about. So here we are. Um, and I'd like to thank Thomas once again for being here. We literally this is by the skin of our teeth. Like I said before, this is all being done in one session. And we started about an hour and 45 minutes ago. So I'm keeping this man up. Like he's an hour ahead of me. So he really I'm doing bad things. I'm being a bad host, but he's here for my sadism, okay? Um so Thomas, let's jump right back into it, okay? So where did Maryland come in, and what was that journey like for you?
The journey has been very long and in a lot of different directions. So I went to college at Ole Miss, so North Mississippi. But then I went to get a master's in Northeast Missouri. And then after that, I was like, well, why not one more master's? So I actually went to Philly, like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then after that, that's when COVID hit. And so I actually moved back to Mississippi for a while as I was on the job hunt. Went through like several months of, oh, we're no longer looking for anyone for this position. We've frozen our hiring process, blah, 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 all those things that basically say, well, you're not getting paid this month. But then finally, I landed this one position that I really like in Frederick, Maryland. It wasn't really that I was looking specifically for a job in Maryland. I went through organizations that I knew. I went through like position titles, the type of work I wanted to do, and this is just where I ended up. And then I hit the ground running, just trying to be involved in the community.
So I guess how would you describe the cultural whiplash between all of the places that you've been on your journey, if there was any?
Well, that's the thing. In some ways, there was a lot of it because you have to, it's like you're completely exiting the society you're used to and entering a new one. And some of these places, like even in Northeast Missouri, like the people around me were just, well, for one, the culture is very different there. So like so much that's there is like very different from South Mississippi. But you start to, I guess, become a part of the community and you realize like, well, it's not all that different because like this was still a very, kind of conservative, very Christian area. And so it's like it mirrored in a lot of ways the area I had come from in South Mississippi. Now, moving from there to Philly was very different just because I was like in the middle of the city. Like it's, depending on the year, it's the fifth or sixth largest city in the country. I'm going somewhere like that from a 2,500 person town in South Mississippi, like that was very different. But at the same time, again, there I kind of hit the ground running doing like political work in the community. When I would go out and talk to people in different parts of Philadelphia, like there was still a lot of that, oh, I heard a lot of this back at home. This is sort of the mentality I was raised with. So I think what I've realized is that, yes, we have these vastly different cultures in these different parts of the country, but ultimately people have the same types of conversations. People are worried about the same types of things. And there's so much of, there are different interpretations of values that people have, but there are some of those core American values that you just don't get away from no matter where you move.
Absolutely. So how has the gay scene for you evolved over that time as well? What did you notice any cultural differences in the queer communities that you were involved in?
Yeah, so I didn't experience much of a gay community at all in Mississippi.
where you were. Yeah. I mean, Oxford, I mean, there's something. I mean, you go on Grinder in Oxford and there's gonna be, a heap and a helping.
No, and again, I was also, so like I was in that period of, even when I was in college, like I was still suppressing a lot of the fact that I was gay, and actually toward the end of college had a girlfriend because I was still convincing myself that I was heterosexual.
For
um,
the everybody who's listening, you should have seen how large my eyes just got. That was not what I was expecting. But I mean, it's your journey, it's your
yeah.
life. Very, very interesting. Keep going.
So, so that being said, I didn't really experience much of the gay scene in Mississippi. Not that there was all that much of one where I grew up anyway. Um, but then even going to Missouri, maybe if I had ended up in one of the bigger cities like Kansas City or St. Louis, it would have been different. But I was in a rural part of that state as well, and it kind of all looked the same. Like after that one wannabe heterosexual relationship fell apart, um, there was the, oh, let's see if this app leads me anywhere. And they're like, they led places, but everything was like very quiet. Like everyone was in hiding. It was like, it's a very closeted community in that area because it's still a very Christian conservative, we're not okay with people kind of place.
Mhm.
Um, but then Philly was like completely different. Like there were literal areas that were just for LGBTQ plus people. Like I had never been in a city that had like, they literally have the gayborhood. Like it's this wonderful place. But like being able to bar hop in just gay bars, like that was a new experience for me. And so it was like very cool to have a more vibrant gay nightlife somewhere where a gay nightlife actually existed. And that to me, I think, that was after coming out, but it really kind of made my journey more complete in being able to come to terms with the fact that like, you feel alone in some places, but ultimately that's not the case because there are people that have like entire communities built here that say, we're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere. And to me, that was comforting, just to say like there are these established areas where it's like everyone is just, I mean, like bad things happen, but ultimately like you're okay here, like you're safe here, like this is a place that was made for you, and like that was comforting to me, and it was a really cool experience. Going from there to here, like Frederick, Maryland is the second largest city in Maryland, which is not saying all that much because it's still kind of small. um, there's not much of a gay scene here at all. I've been here only during the pandemic, so like I don't see many of the things that are going on, but occasionally there's like a drag show that'll come to the area or somewhere nearby. And but I think going through that journey of all those different places, especially being able to immerse myself in an area like the neighborhood of Philly, like I think that kind of gave me more of the internal self-confidence in who I am, that I don't necessarily need a whole established, community around me to feel like I'm at home somewhere, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And you say that it's comforting. Is it comforting now, or rather like did you immediately feel that comfort, or was there like a certain level of fear, for you, especially because I feel like at the time you were still generally finding yourself whenever you came into such like a place like Philly. I mean, like once again, like, there's going to be a difference between the grinder in Northeast Missouri, and the grinder that you're going to see in Philly. I mean, whole dedicated neighborhoods and everything like that. I mean, did it feel a little overwhelming at times, or at first rather?
It did. And at first when I got to Philly, I had just gotten out of relationship, and I wasn't really looking for anything. But then, that quickly changed, and I was just like, you know what, maybe I'll start dating again. And it just like, there were lots of people, like the scene is much more intense, I guess I would say, just because like it's not, you're not really going to come across a bunch of people that are like, oh, I've never done this before, or like I've never told anyone, or like, I mean, there are still the people that are DL and the people that are not out, but you have a lot of people there who are out, and like they are very experienced in ways that you're not. And I'm not just talking like sexually, I mean just like in terms of having these conversations, in terms of navigating this world. And it's like it was definitely eye-opening. It was a little scary to think that like I had to learn gay language, like knowing like
Yeah.
that's just not something I had been exposed to before, at least not in the real world. So it was, sorry, I'm off track. What was the question again? I just want to make sure I bring it back.
Or I guess, yeah, like the question was like, was it intimidating for you, I guess being kind of thrust into this huge gay space? I mean, you talk about diversity. Of course, yeah, there were still DL guys. There were still guys where it was like, oh yeah, I mean, this is my first time, or, stuff like that. But like, I imagine in a city like Philadelphia, you have the diversity of like, okay, like, not only do we have the wider LGBT community represented here in some aspect or modicum or another, but you also have the entirety of the gay spectrum there. It's like, yes, I'm a total twink. I'm a bear, like I am a leather daddy, stuff like that. And I imagine for you, having only, I guess, consumed that in like media or fiction, actually being thrust into that, did you almost kind of have like, not an identity crisis, but like, did that definitely give you like a huge moment to search within yourself and find where exactly you fit within the community?
It did. And ultimately I was like, I I think the most important thing is to be able to I guess just to have a functional understanding of what people are talking about. I think
Yes.
that was the most important thing. Um, I sure found some labels that worked for me, but I think that the most intimidating thing for me though was that people seemed in those areas to have just like such a leg up in terms of understanding the community itself and understanding like their tribes and their tastes and things of that sort. And it's like that's not really something that I had all that much time to explore, because I was in places where you just kind of whisper that you're gay and then you go from there, like
Right.
um but yeah, so it was a bit intimidating, but I I navigated it. I figured it out.
And I'm glad on it. I'm glad on it. Do you think even that experience kind of informed the drive that you have politically? Like, do you feel like somehow like that kind of gave you a greater purpose, like a greater sense of purpose?
Yes. So it kind of, I guess I would say, just like really solidified some of um the things that I want to accomplish at some point in my career. And um one of those, I became really interested in sexual and reproductive health um back the first time I was in grad school. And then moving to Philly, being in that scene, I realized like I'm not the only person this has happened to, like just feeling, completely overwhelmed and uneducated. And it's not like, I don't think we're going to post a chart of like who's a bear, who's an otter, who's a twink on, bathroom stalls in public schools. That's not what I'm saying. But I think a comprehensive education needs to be like across the board. It needs to be available to people because, I worked with the school district, and we would hear health reports that were just, they would break your heart, of people that would hurt themselves, or they would end up in some kind of situation that they just, to them, it was a life-ending crisis because they just didn't know what to do with themselves. They, whether it was they didn't know how to protect themselves properly when they were having sex, or they used some type of object that was not meant for that and hurt themselves, or they
Oh,
otherwise had some kind of injury or something. Like, this really does damage to people, like emotional damage, sure, but like definitely physical damage. And like, people have been really hurt just because they didn't have enough of an education to know how to keep themselves safe and to do things in a healthy way. And so it's not quite the same as saying, I wish I had had a tutorial on the different tribes that I could belong to, but in terms of being safe, staying safe, and just like not feeling like you're doing something wrong by exploring your interests and the things that you're attracted to. Like, I think that's something that really needs to be more widely accessible, and for students at young ages to be able to say, okay, as you develop, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to feel what you feel, and you should have someone to go to be able to explain things to you. Like, that's sort of what I want to cultivate. That's something that, and being immersed in that kind of environment really told me, like, yes, this is needed even more so than I ever realized before. And so that's one of my long-term goal type of accomplishments that I want to work on.
absolutely. And I 100% support you, audience, to kind of put everything that Thomas was just saying into perspective on a personal note. So, um, to make it all about me. No, but like, your friendly neighborhood host is in his personal life is incredibly debaucherous. Um, I I'm an incredibly sexual human being. Um, and Thomas, I'm sure that you kind of identify with this whenever I say this, but like a lot of the ways that I learned about gay sex was exclusively through porn. Um, and no matter if it's gay porn or straight porn, mine was all gay porn. But porn is specifically is a marketing tool. It's all marketing, it's all editing, it's all movie magic. Um it's not necessarily reality. Like, I mean, unless you're watching the amateur stuff, sure, but like, it's catered, it's packaged, and it's cut in a certain way to give you everything that you want to see and everything that will get you, where you're going, we'll say. But like, it's not exactly reality. They have a whole crew, they have nurses, they have, I mean, porn stars have like weekly, monthly checkups and everything like that to make sure that they're in proper performing order, you know. Um, but just to see that as a little 13, 14 year old, you just kind of take for granted that that's the way that things are supposed to be. um and even now as a 27-year-old, I mean, for instance, like I've recently really I'm really starting to try to get into like sex toys and everything like that. But the thing is, like, you kind of just like all we really have specifically in Mississippi is like, I mean, you have your sex shops every now, and I'm sure it was well, you really, I assume that you weren't really exploring that side of yourself when you were living in Mississippi. But for you, like living an hour away from Hattiesburg, I assume that the only sex toy shop nearby was like the Platinum Palace or Peppers in Hattiesburg, which is like an hour away.
First, yeah.
I was gonna say, like, you would have to drive all that way just to get that. And I mean, thank God for people like the staff at Peppers who like are very knowledgeable and care a lot about sexual health and like the usage of the products that they sell. However, on the whole, like I have romantic adventures here in Jackson. If you've ever listened to the radio in the Jackson area, shop romantic adventures. Um, and the thing is, like, the staff is always like, let me know if you have any questions or you need help finding anything, but it's never like, okay, like here's like the proper kind of lubrication that you're going to need to buy for this specific kind of material. And this is the proper way to clean this sex toy. And this is the proper, like, if you feel this type of way whenever you're trying to insert this sex toy, you should probably stop, like, and on top of that, even past that, in my own personal life, in therapy and stuff like that, you deal with a lot of shame. So, like, even though I'm a grown man, I have my own personality, I have my own beliefs and everything like that. There is still, like, whenever it comes to certain things, there is still a level of shame associated that has been learned and developed over time growing up in a conservative, Christian household. So, like, it's harder to ask specific questions about stuff you just really want to know about. And at the same time, you also feel just bad about, like, if anything goes wrong, immediately you blame yourself and you revert back to shame brain, basically, is the best way I can describe it, and but at the end of the day, I think, Thomas, like, I think it's great that you want to destigmatize a lot of things in order to actually, like, progress scientifically and medically forward to make sure that everyone is doing their part. And even past that, like, I'm a sexually active adult gay man and I would like to start taking PrEP. However, I don't know if it's the same way in Maryland, but I don't have great insurance. I'm not on my parents' insurance anymore. So PrEP is incredibly expensive. There are supplemental programs and everything, but, like, the thing is, they don't just outright tell you about these things. These are things that you have to seek out in order to find PrEP that's either free or affordable. And even then, depending on what kind of budget you're on, I mean, it goes back to healthcare as a human right, but it highlights, like, the fact that even today, like, sexual health is still a little stigmatized. Like, even, like, in the local Walmart and Walgreens, like, the condoms are locked up behind glass. Like, you have to go get an attendant in order to buy condoms and contraception. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's sorry, the last thing you said just sticks with me. It's like, as much shame as people are made to feel just for thinking about sex, much less actually acting on it or trying to protect themselves, they're not going to just come out of that and say, oh, excuse me, can you please get these condoms for me? Like, they're either going to try to steal them or they're just going to go without, because that's what we've cultivated here. And in our society is to be ashamed of the fact that you're a sexual being, to be ashamed of the fact that you have desires and attraction, and then on top of that, to be ashamed that you want to keep yourself safe. Like, I don't know, it's honestly horrible to think of the psychological effects that it has on people, especially when it comes to something like trying to get PrEP. Like, there's all this fear mongering about HIV and about AIDS, which, especially for HIV, it's mostly unfounded now because of the miraculous treatments that are available, but
Yes.
still a very serious condition. And you hear people demonize those who have HIV. You hear, how scary it is and how dangerous it is. But then those same voices are telling you that PrEP is going to make you extra promiscuous and it just gives you an excuse to have unprotected sex and things like that. And so that's yet another barrier. But then, even if you get past all of those barriers of the stigma, it is, like you said, incredibly expensive. The only way I was able to get it, I was on PrEP for, like, I can't remember exactly how long. It was like a year and a half or something. When I lived in Philly, I went through the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, where they had like an in-house clinic and an in-house pharmacy. And I was able to tell them, look, I'm broke. I'm a grad student. Like, I want to be safe. I want to not spread anything, and, like, definitely not contract anything, but I definitely don't want to spread anything either. How can I get this? And they were able to sign me up for this program. I still had to pay for testing, which you have to be tested every 3 months when you're on PrEP. And so that can be expensive, but the PrEP itself was free for me. And that was a life changer. But you have to know about these things to ask for them. And like, there are just so many barriers to access where it's like, at what point do you start to question whether people actually give a damn about other people? You know, like, you're setting up all these barriers. You're telling me, one, it's bad to think about having sex. It's bad to have sex. It's bad if you're gay and you want to have sex. It's also bad if you get a sexually transmitted infection. So we're going to make it seem bad to protect yourself too. Like,
Right.
we win.
Or like, once again, even back to the sex toys, you're really bad, even if you're not having sex. If you want to pleasure yourself with this object created by this sleazy, evil, promiscuous company, and because you don't really know what you're doing with it, you're going to like go to the emergency room, or you're going to get an infection from your, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many things that like go into everything. I mean, like, once again, real world example, you know, talking about like, either you're going to like, you're either not going to buy the condoms or at all, or you're going to steal them. It's like, you have to also remember, like, there's a human element too. You get a message from Dom Top Daddy 69 saying that he can be there in 10 minutes. The Walgreens is 5 minutes from your house. Okay. So you drive over to the Walgreens. Time is like ticking, and Dom Top Daddy will not wait. Okay. He's probably got a girlfriend to go back home to, and he wants to make this quick. Okay. So like, you go to the Walgreens, and you don't like, you walk up to the condoms and you're like, oh my God, like, they're locked up. You check your watch. You have 3 minutes left to get back to your apartment. Damn, like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? I mean, literally puts you in a completely unnecessary bind over nothing. And most of this, we can go on a tangent really quick. You know, it's incredible to me that or rather, you know what, let's use this tangent to move on to the next point, which is like, you know, a difference in Mississippi politics and the politics where you're currently living. So like, Mississippi politics, as I'm sure everyone out there listening, and as I'm sure you know, Jackson, is predominantly dominated by Republicans. We are a red state through and through. And so Republicans generally, if not all the way speaking, are very anti-abortion. They will fight tooth and nail for the rights of a fetus, of a clump of cells. But at the same time, they're the same ones that legislate against forms of contraception, or rather they make it, even if they're not legislating against it, they're ensuring that it's harder to get your hands on. So it's really a catch-22, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't you say, like, it's a real catch-22, where it's like, oh, what are we doing here? Like, which is it? You know what I mean? Like, the easiest way to prevent abortion would be comprehensive sex education, and also greater access to contraception, right? I mean, isn't that kind of common sense?
Well, I forget. I think someone else said this once, but I'm going to steal it because I can't remember who. That common sense isn't all that common.
Correct.
Yes, absolutely. Like, if you have these very simple tools to prevent something that you don't want to happen, why wouldn't you take advantage of those tools? Like, and they're simple, like, condoms are not expensive to make.
Absolutely not.
They're generally, like, in some places, believe it or not, it is common practice to put like a bowl or a basket of condoms within reach in healthcare facilities.
I was just gonna say, at USM, the University of Southern Mississippi, SMTT, literally at the campus health clinic, I grabbed a handful of condoms because they had they had every size you could think of right there for anyone to grab for free because they know it's a college campus and they know what college students are generally up to. You know what I mean? Like, and they provided that for free. Were they Trojans? No. Were they, for his or her pleasure? No, but like they were functional. They were there and they were functional. You know what I mean? Like, and that was the most important part. It was free contraception right there at your fingertips.
Yeah. And, that's pretty commonplaces or pretty commonplace in a lot of places that are not predominantly conservative. But so, it was while I was living in Philly, I think I had this realization, because I went back to Mississippi for a bit, got sick, had to go to the doctor, and then I was just looking around and you couldn't find a condom anywhere, like even in the exam rooms, like they weren't there. And that's like, it's just like a very basic thing. Like especially you look at like statistics of sexually transmitted infections, they are the highest in the places that have abstinence only sex education.
Correct.
And for people who couldn't see that, those were huge quotes because of sarcasm. But it would make sense in those places more than anywhere else to want to have condoms freely available to people, because like that's just like the bare minimum of protection, and you don't even see them there. So it's like, not only are people more likely to end up with a sexually transmitted infection in those areas, they're also less likely to have access to any kind of protection whatsoever. And they're least likely to have ever been exposed to like the actual factual scientific information about sexual and reproductive health. It's maddening, to say the least.
It really is. And like, I think that highlights, I mean, once again, a difference between the political landscape of places like Mississippi and I guess places like Philly or Maryland. Like, I guess the farther north that you go. Now, how would you describe the political landscape of Maryland? Because obviously, like, Washington, D.C. is kind of like a little dot there. Like, what is it? Is it on the border of Maryland and
Virginia?
Virginia? Yeah. Sorry, honey. I got a Mississippi education, so geography is not my strong suit. But yeah, so like it's on the border of Maryland and Virginia, and Washington, D.C. is obviously a mixed bag. But like, would you describe Maryland as a little bit more liberal than Mississippi?
Definitely, but as a whole, the state I think is pretty well mixed. And that's a nice way of saying it. We currently have a Republican governor. I don't know if you realize that.
I did not. Wait, who's the governor?
Larry Hogan.
Larry Hogan. Okay. No, that's not who I thought it was. Anyway, yes, go ahead.
So, we have definitely a blended political landscape. Both of our US senators are Democrats. We always vote for the Democrat in a presidential election, but at the state level and at the local level, like sometimes that's not the case. And so right now we have a Republican governor. Who knows how we have an election for governor this year. So that's something I'm working on too. We'll see how that goes. It's making everyone pull their hair out. But yeah, it's a very different landscape just because there is a mix. Like any single place you go, you can hear both sides of the political spectrum represented, versus like when I'm in Mississippi, like it's very rare, but sometimes I will spot another Democrat.
Yeah, and like honestly, for me, living in central Mississippi, I just moved to Jackson, which is the capital of Mississippi. And Jackson is basically like one one of the few blue dots in the state of Mississippi. And honestly, because of the nature of Mississippi, that's also very racialized. So, there's a high Black population in Jackson, and therefore, demographically speaking, Black people tend to vote more Democrat than they do Republican. And also, uh, I guess if you're from the South, this will come as no surprise to you. But unsurprisingly, Jackson is also incredibly impoverished. And we have our state leadership is all Republican. Rather, I guess our national state leadership is all Republican. We have Cindy Hyde Smith, for God's sakes, and Tate Reeves is our governor. So you know, like it just it's very, you feel like your voice is being drowned out, which I think is another big reason why I started the podcast in the first place, was to give a voice to people who felt very voiceless. Obviously, I'm sure once you kind of had your liberal awakening, you kind of felt like you were being drowned out in your own environment whenever you would come home. And it's incredible, but at the same time, I took part in Capital City Pride back in 2021. First ever Capital City Pride, huge event, and it gave me hope for the future. It really, it gave me hope for the future of Mississippi, especially because last year, especially, there was the bill that was the anti-trans athlete bill in Mississippi. And so, we were really dealing with a lot of people who were in the political spectrum, who were basically doing the old song and dance of demonizing trans athletes. It's not fair for this man who transitioned into a woman to take advantage of female sports, which, let's be honest, Republicans didn't care about women's sports until trans women started hopping in. But that's neither here nor there. It was specifically targeting high school trans athletes, and I believe college age trans athletes. But the worst part about that is, what's so sinister about that to me is that high school and college age people are the most vulnerable as far as psychological matters go. I mean, that's when you're still in your psychologically formative age. And so demonizing them and making them feel othered or outsiders just kind of increases the rate of all sorts of negative psychological side effects. Let alone how the state legislature handled COVID. I mean, we were one of the first states to open back up back in 2020. I believe we actually had a state representative die of COVID last year or the year before. And still, we're kind of still on this full steam ahead kind of situation now. How does that compare to Maryland right now?
Well, so yet again, Maryland is a very mixed bag. But I will say that we have some stability there, because we do have a pretty broadly Democratic controlled state legislature. And so it's weird. The state as a whole voted for more Democrats than Republicans to lead the state legislatively, but then they voted for a Republican to be the governor. So whatever. But things like that still come up, our governor still does not want to acknowledge some of the realities of COVID. But the state legislature will still pass bills that say, hey, we're conscious of this, we care about it, we want to actually do something. And we actually, Democrats have a veto proof majority here. So it's like, we still get some things done. So it's like very different type of landscape. Like we actually have people who are doing the work to get the work done versus, just obstructing or trying to bring harm.
Yeah.
Um, but, I don't hear of the, like the trans exclusion and the removal of trans protection type legislative actions here.
Yes.
And I think it's mainly just because we have such an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature that it's not something that we really even have to worry about as much here, which is refreshing. But at the same time, like there are always those forces that are looking to try to gain power again. Like we have a Republican candidate for governor now who is like trying to fashion himself after the former president. And he's using a lot of that type of rhetoric that makes me worry. Like, if he can get enough people behind him and he can, get people in the state legislature that think like him, like we would be moving in that direction as well. So it's, like I said, it's a mixed bag. Like we're in a good place now, but that doesn't necessarily mean we'll be in that good place in a year's time.
And I was just gonna say, like, I think the scariest thing about Trump being president was not Trump himself, but like kind of the Pandora's box that he opened. I mean, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out of the woodwork, spouting their bullshit. I mean, even Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, while Trump was in office, it was like almost like a Game of Thrones-esque thing where it was like every Republican was trying to prove how loyal they were to Trump. You know what I mean? And like, unfortunately, even after Trump has gone, some of these Republicans are still doing the exact same thing, that or they have smarted up. And when I say smarted up, I mean for their own gains, not for not actually smarted up and disavowed everything, that they supported before. And they have started evolving into, like post-Trump believers, and like they saw that that's what won Trump the presidency, so they're like, this will definitely, like, if I spew enough of this shit, like I will definitely get where I want to be.
Yeah.
And that's really scary, especially, I mean, even in a place like, like Maryland. Now I will say too, though, Marjorie Taylor Greene comes from Georgia, but historically speaking, in the 2020 election, Georgia went Democrat. And that's basically what helped win Joe Biden the election in the first place. Like, and I think for you specifically in your line of work with the Democratic committee where you are, like it does reassure people that every vote does actually count.
Yeah. No, it does. And that's honestly my own personal philosophy. So it's not something that goes along with any party or with the committee itself, but like my own personal internal motto is that every vote counts and every voice matters. And that's something that I kind of use when I'm actually working on motivating people to vote and to, like, to show up to the elections, is just in saying, like, it can really be a matter of a razor thin margin that, determines whether something that you've always taken for granted here is taken away from you or not. And like, that sounds alarmist, but like, it's actually what's happening. Like, people are trying to take, like you mentioned Roe versus Wade earlier, like the fact that this is something that we're still talking about in 2022 as a thing that a whole party is trying to repeal, and like trying to overturn that decision by the Supreme Court. Like, it just, I hope that it reinvigorates people and shows them, like, you can't take anything for granted. Like, we have to be active, we have to show up, we have to turn out, because like everything depends on our constant engagement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I I mean, not to sound alarmist either, but like, I mean, y'all go watch The Handmaid's Tale. Like, I mean, literally, like I have only seen like the first 5 episodes and they made me feel such anxiety that I had to stop. I might actually pick it back up soon, but like still, like it's incredibly relevant, and our rights at the end of the day are always hanging in the balance. It really just depends, which is why it's so important to make sure that you are actually staying informed. You are actually staying informed. You are actually, I mean, giving a shit. I've gotten to the point now where anytime, someone's like, oh, I don't really care for politics, I'm like, why not? Why not? Like, literally, like, I understand you feel frustrated. We all do. But at the end of the day, like, this is monumentally important. Like, so anyway,
And,
yeah.
to be fair, like, just as we kind of touched on in the last episode, that there's a lot of procedural disenfranchisement. That's my term. But just like,
Correct.
you do all this work, you bring your friends, whatever else they tell you to do to try to, turn out the vote, and the person that you vote for gets elected. Like, people need to see that their elected officials are committing to promises, they're actually fighting for you, doing what they told you they were going to do. So, and that's something else, that's a type of action that I don't think many of us at all engage in, is like trying to keep those pressure campaigns up. You, any time of the day, you can call a representative's office and leave them a message, or you can send them an email. And sometimes during the day, you can actually talk to someone. And like, I am very pro air your complaints, and whether they get listened to or not, at least they've been heard, right? So like, if they hear them enough and they realize, oh, 60% of my constituents are pissed at me, like, they're going to have to figure something out really quick, or they're going to lose their job. So like, to me, that's a powerful thing to remind people that you have that power as long as you use your voice. And so that's a big part of what keeps me going in terms of being involved with the Democratic Committee and the party in general, is just saying like, yes, we always have setbacks, we always have disappointments, but as long as we keep people engaged, we can start moving the needle forward, even if it's slow to move.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Thomas, I believe that we have gone and we have talked, and I think we've been very productive in these 2 episodes, and I thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being so open and present. But like, let's focus in on you one last time, okay?
Okay.
So, Thomas, in 2022, if you could go back in time and tell your childhood self any words of comfort or wisdom, what would they be?
Actually, so something you said earlier made me think this, but so the words that I would say would be run to, but not from. And I say that because I feel like, yes, I chased opportunity. I chased, the schools that offered what I wanted, the places that had the best, whatever I could find. But I also, a part of me was escapist and thought, well, if I get out of this place, then something's going to miraculously be better. And if I go here instead of there, then those problems are going to go away. And what my energy would have been better focused on, instead of trying to run from things, would be to run to what truly works for me, what means something to me, not escape from what wasn't working.
Mhm.
And that's something that counseling helps with as well. Like, it took me going to see a counselor to really realize, like, well, sure, part of what you're saying is true. You are chasing opportunity. You are going after some of the things that, can ultimately make your dreams come true, but you're also avoiding things. You're also running away from what you perceive to be the problem, but like at some point you have to come to terms with, you can't run from everything. Like sometimes you have to hit it head on. You have to address like where you stand in a matter. Like, are you making the problem worse? Is the problem actually the fact that you're avoiding things? Rather than just saying, if I pick up and completely relocate, everything's going to miraculously take care of itself. I think I could have saved a lot of time in my life with that advice. Like, run to, not from.
I mean, absolutely. And I mean, I'm learning that lesson myself now in this part of my life, because having a theater degree, the first thing that you want to do is get out of Mississippi. I mean, that's obviously the first thing that you really want to do. And it has been almost 5 years since I've graduated from college, and I've still not gotten out of Mississippi. And as torturous as that may sound, and as torturous as that probably would have sounded if I were to speak to myself back then to tell them, yeah, in 2022, you're still going to be living in Mississippi. Honestly, it's an opportunity to plant yourself where you are and to leave. Part of running to things and not from things is sometimes leaving things better than you found them. And ultimately, I mean, that's what you're trying to do in a macro sense when it comes to everything. But for me, I mean, I see that too in myself, being here. I mentioned capital city pride. I that reinvigorated my belief that like things could get better. And I'm here now, I'm queer now, and I'm gonna, I'm hoping that like as a result of me being here and trying to like make a change, that I can make a change. So absolutely, like sometimes it does require you to run right into the fire.
Yes, and I will say, I think at the beginning of our conversation, you kind of discounted, or at least seemed to discount, the importance of what you're doing. But I will say that's the reason I'm here, is because I thought it was such an important thing that you're doing, that you are showing people like LGBTQ plus people exist everywhere. And there are ways that we have to find to balance the world around us, to exist in the world around us, but we are there. And I think showing that presence is there, showing that there is at least some sense of solidarity, somewhere to go, somewhere to find information, I think is incredibly important. And that's the type of thing that saves lives in areas where people feel alone and they feel like they don't have anywhere to turn, they don't have a community. And so I thank you for what you do. And I think this is an amazing thing, and never say that it's not important, because it's very important.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much. I've been doing this so long, and you try not to look at numbers and everything like that. But, at the end of the day, it's like, I mean, once again, it really is a labor of love, and I really do believe that like somewhere out there, someone is listening and this is making a difference for them. But like, it's still work. It has, or rather it has become work now. And like, it's one of those things where I think that it's just the same as what you do, where it's like I feel like there is burnout and there is exhaustion and everything like that, but at the end of the day, you have to remember what you're working for, what you're really doing to help motivate you to keep going.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think everyone needs that. And if they're able to go to one place like the Out in the Woods podcast and see like there's gays out here, like, I think that's one way to keep people engaged and kind of centered, to know that, there's a place that belongs to them too.
Absolutely. And I've mentioned this podcast before, but Thomas, in case you haven't heard it, which actually you listened to the episode with Evan Brechtel, so you've heard me mention this podcast before, but for anyone out there, definitely if you're in the LGBT community and you feel like you need a little dose of empowerment, please go listen to the Making Gay History podcast, because honestly, like knowing where we came from and how far we've come and hearing the individual stories from gay, queer history makers will absolutely inspire you to keep being yourself and keep going and keep making history, because at the end of the day, like, we're still a minority and we still have a long way to go, as a minority group, maybe not necessarily gay people, but the LGBTQIA plus community still has a long way to go. um and for anyone who's listening currently, let's fight for our trans kin, please. Like, everybody out there, our trans kin, they have that red sniper rifle dot on their forehead constantly in this country and everywhere else, but especially in this country right now. Like, they're we talk about like how easy it is and how precarious our rights are, but especially trans people, they haven't even necessarily achieved all the rights necessary to say that their rights are precarious. Like, we are still fighting for them, even on a legislative level, even on a judicial level, to make sure that it's not a crime to kill them, so um or rather to make sure that it is a crime to kill them, because there are, trans panic is still an argument that you can use in the court of law to protect yourself, if you have murdered a person who is trans. So, you know, think about that going forward in your day-to-day life. Thomas, I could really go on talking to you for hours. I really and truly could. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap things up. Now, once again, I didn't prepare questions or talking points, so you did not see this far enough in advance. But Thomas, do you have any shout outs? Do you have any promotions? Or do you have any philanthropic opportunities that the listeners of Out in the Woods should know about right now?
I don't at the moment. I wish I had a couple of things up and running more that I could tell you about to promote. But I guess stay tuned and maybe we'll have to do another episode eventually and I can promote a couple of things.
Absolutely. I would honestly just love to have you on a sweet tea episode so that you can fag out with me and all my friends. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity. Um, I think for me though, I do have an interjection here for my on behalf of me in the Jackson area. The mayor of Ridgeland, Mississippi, which is directly north of Jackson, Mississippi, right between Jackson and Madison, recently, or rather today, said that he was going to pull the $110,000 budget of the Ridgeland Public Library if they did not remove all books in the children's section that had any reference to LGBTQIA matters. Um, so the thing is, as Thomas said, you can actually call the office of the mayor of Ridgeland. You can actually email the mayor of Ridgeland, Mississippi. So if you feel so inclined out there, I highly encourage you to call him and remind him why the decision he is making is not only detrimental to the poor librarians who are being caught up in this crossfire, whose very fucking living is being threatened, but also to remind him why it is detrimental to LGBTQIA youth who are just figuring themselves out and thankfully living 2022 where they have greater access to books that might actually help them find themselves and identify themselves and validate their identity. So yeah. Anyway, Thomas, let's talk again soon. I hope that you get plenty of rest. I hope I didn't keep you up too late. And everybody else out there, thank you so much as always for coming out in the woods and into my closet.